The moment I stepped onto the dock, I knew something was wrong. The lake, usually calm and reflective, had a strange stillness to it. No ripples, no sounds, just dead silence. I cast my line, but instead of the familiar plop of the bait hitting the water, there was an unnatural splash. Like the surface itself was resisting. I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked down. The water, normally so clear, so alive, was now a murky, oily mess. It wasn't just the usual debris from the night's wind. It was thick, swirling with a dark, unnatural hue. The light from the setting sun struggled to pierce through it, casting eerie, distorted reflections on the surface. Something was poisoning my lake. I couldn't prove it, not yet, but I could feel it in my bones. The fish, once abundant, were nowhere to be seen. Not a single ripple from a fish jumping. Not even the usual buzz of insects skimming the water. Just an unnatural void. I reeled in the line quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel eyes on me. Looking over my shoulder, I saw a few of my neighbors gathered at the edge of the lake. They were all staring at the water in the same silent horror, as if none of us could fully comprehend what we were seeing. "What the hell happened?" one of them muttered, barely audible. I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. This wasn't an accident. Someone with power had done this on purpose. And I had no idea how far this would go, but I was about to find out. The lake had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. It wasn't just a body of water. It was my retreat, my refuge from the noise of the world. Growing up, my father had taught me how to fish there. I'd spent countless mornings and afternoons by its shores, the sound of the line slicing through the air my only company. I could tell you the names of the fish that lived in those waters, how the seasons changed the colors of the leaves around the lake, and which spots were best for catching bass. It wasn't just my escape. It was everyone's. The lake was the centerpiece of our small community. The homes around it were modest. Most of them passed down through generations. Everyone knew each other, and everyone understood that the lake was sacred. It wasn't just a source of leisure. It was a part of our history. It had always been this way. Or, at least it had been, until recently. The HOA had been making waves for the past couple of years, slowly but surely tightening its grip on the neighborhood. At first, it was small stuff. Rules about lawn maintenance, mailbox colors, things that didn't seem to matter much. But it didn't take long before they started pushing for more control, using their power to influence everything. They were always trying to improve the neighborhood, which, in their eyes, meant taking away what made the place unique. It wasn't long before the HOA started demanding changes around the lake, improvements that were framed as safety measures. They put up fences around certain areas, restricted access to certain spots along the shore, and even started charging people for the privilege of fishing. The whole thing felt off, but no one questioned it. The HOA had power, and everyone, myself included, had learned to just go along with it. It wasn't until a few months ago that the signs started to appear, the first hints that something was wrong with the lake. At first it was subtle, a strange odor wafting from the water every so often, a few odd dead fish washing up near the shore. Then it was the constant presence of workers. They'd show up with large tanks and machinery doing something near the water's edge. When I asked them what they were doing, they always gave me vague answers, saying it was just routine maintenance. But something about their eyes, the way they avoided my gaze, made me suspicious. It wasn't until one evening, when I'd gone out for my usual fishing trip, that I saw them, the men from the HOA board, standing on the edge of the lake, talking in low voices. They weren't even trying to hide what they were saying. As I approached, I caught a few words. Water supply, project cost, and most troubling of all, we'll make sure no one notices. That's when the pieces started to come together. The HOA wasn't just messing with the lake to make it nicer. They had a far more insidious reason for all of this. They were using the lake as their own personal resource, draining it, poisoning it, manipulating it for their gain. It was no longer just about controlling the neighborhood. It was about controlling the water supply that everyone relied on, all while making sure that no one would realize it until it was too late. I began to connect the dots. The HOA had been slowly increasing their influence over every aspect of our community, and now they were targeting the one thing that everyone depended on, the lake. And I, it seemed, was the only one who could see it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. Something big. But every time I tried to dig deeper, every time I confronted the HOA, I was met with resistance, cold shoulders, vague answers, and the unmistakable sense that they were hiding something. It wasn't just the board members anymore. The whole neighborhood had become a web of silence, a strange, suffocating atmosphere that made it clear no one wanted to rock the boat. I remember one night, just after sunset, when I went down to the lake for a last-ditch effort to find some answers. The smell of decay was stronger now, something metallic and foul that hung in the air like a heavy fog. I walked the shoreline looking for any sign of what was happening beneath the surface. But the more I looked, the more I realized there was nothing natural about this. The fish were gone, the water was thicker than ever, and the lake felt wrong. As I stood there staring at the water, I saw a truck pull up in the distance. It was one of the HOA's contractors. Large white van, tinted windows, with a logo I hadn't seen before. The van parked near the old boathouse where I knew no one usually went. I tried to sneak closer, but the crunch of gravel under my feet gave me away. The driver turned his head, locking eyes with me, then quickly sped off before I could reach the spot. That night I couldn't sleep. I had a hunch that they were doing something they didn't want me to see. Maybe it was just a gut feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I went to the local town hall, hoping someone there might know what was going on. I approached the receptionist, an older woman who'd been working there for years. I had always trusted her. "Do you know anything about the lake?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She glanced around nervously before leaning in close. "You should be careful, son," she whispered. "There's a lot of talk about what they're doing to the water, but no one wants to speak up. The HOA, they've got connections. People who ask too many questions disappear." Her words hung in the air like a weight. People who ask too many questions disappear. Was she talking about the lake or something else entirely? I left town hall with more questions than answers. That night I decided to confront the HOA board directly. They had called a meeting, another community update, they claimed, but I knew better. I knew this was a chance to get to the truth. The room was filled with the usual suspects, neighbors who were too afraid to speak up, homeowners who just wanted to keep the peace. I could see the tension in the air. The board members, all of them well-dressed and polished, sat at the front, their eyes scanning the room as though they were in control of the entire situation. They barely looked at me when I stood up and asked about the lake. One of them, a man named David Klein, who had been the most vocal about improving the neighborhood, shot me a sharp look. "There's nothing to worry about, Mr. Bashir. We're just taking precautions. The water is fine. It's perfectly safe." But his voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I wasn't buying it. I pressed further, asking about the strange odor, the dead fish, and the contractors I had seen. They shifted in their seats, exchanged nervous glances, but didn't give me a straight answer. Instead, they deflected, accusing me of stirring up trouble, of not appreciating the hard work they were doing to improve the area. I could feel the weight of their words sinking in. They weren't just trying to shut me down. They were trying to intimidate me, to make me believe that questioning them wasn't worth the trouble, and for a moment it worked. I almost backed off, almost gave up. But then I remembered the words of the receptionist, and I realized something important. They weren't afraid of the truth. They were afraid of me uncovering it. That night, I sat in my car staring at the lake under the pale moonlight. I could feel the weight of the board's gaze still on me, even though they weren't physically there. The silence of the water felt oppressive, like a warning. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about power, and they would do anything to protect it. I had no choice now. I had to find out what they were doing, and I had to do it fast. The longer I waited, the more dangerous this whole thing was becoming. I thought I had figured it out. The HOA was controlling the lake, poisoning it slowly, and they were using the water to manipulate the entire community. It seemed clear enough, and I felt like I was getting closer to the truth. But the more I dug, the more questions I had. The deeper I went, the darker it became. One afternoon, I decided to follow the contractors I had seen near the lake. I didn't have a plan. just a gut feeling that I was missing something. I trailed behind them from a distance as they drove to the outskirts of the neighborhood, to an area I had never seen them go before. It was a small, secluded spot, tucked away behind a line of trees. They parked near an old, dilapidated building that I had always thought was abandoned. I stayed hidden, watching them unload equipment, a few tanks, some large hoses, and what looked like barrels of something, though I couldn't make out the labels. My heart began to race. I was on the verge of discovering something huge. I decided to get closer. As I moved in, I heard their voices clearly now. It wasn't just the contractors. There was someone else with them. A voice I didn't recognize, a man with a calm, almost soothing tone. "We've got to make sure they don't realize what's happening," the man said. "Once the lake's contaminated, it'll take years to reverse the damage. By then, we'll be in full control of the water supply." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Control of the water supply? I leaned in further, trying to get a better look at the barrels. They were labeled with the word cyanide in bold red letters. My mind raced. Cyanide? That was what they were poisoning the lake with? I quickly backed away, panic setting in. I needed evidence. I needed to prove this, but I couldn't risk being seen. I barely made it back to my car, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I had just heard. I didn't go home that night. I drove around in circles, replaying everything in my mind. The HOA had been deliberately poisoning the lake, contaminating it with cyanide, a substance that was lethal to all forms of life. But why? Why would they go to such lengths? That's when it hit me. It wasn't about fishing. It wasn't about making the neighborhood more upscale. It was about control. They needed the lake for their own private water supply. They were poisoning the entire thing to make sure no one else could access it. The entire neighborhood had been living in ignorance, drinking from a tainted source, believing it was safe. And the worst part? The HOA knew no one would ever suspect them. They controlled everything, the land, the rules, the people. They could poison the lake in front of everyone, and no one would question them. I rushed back to the boathouse, determined to find something, anything that could prove I wasn't imagining things. That's when I found it, a small handwritten log tucked away in the corner of the room. It was old, dusty, and nearly illegible, but what I could make out sent a shiver down my spine. It was a record of the HOA's activities over the past few months, meetings, discussions, all of it leading up to a single phrase that was scrawled at the bottom in bold, frantic letters. "Control the water. Control everything." I felt my stomach turn. It was all true. They had been poisoning the lake not just for power, but for something much, much worse. They had been manipulating everyone in the neighborhood for months, slowly gaining control over the most vital resource we all depended on. But the twist, what I hadn't seen coming, was the realization that my own connection to the lake made me a target. The HOA wasn't just going to let me keep digging. They would stop at nothing to make sure I didn't expose them. And that thought, that realization, that was when I understood just how deep their reach went. I wasn't just fighting for a lake anymore. I was fighting for my survival. This is the moment when everything you thought you knew about the situation gets twisted. The cyanide poisoning is not just about harming the lake or fish, but about controlling the water supply and, by extension, controlling the entire community. This sets up the high stakes and danger ahead. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous it became. I knew I couldn't back down now. The truth about the HOA's control over the lake and the poisoning scheme was bigger than I had ever imagined. But with every step I took, the walls around me tightened. They weren't just trying to control the water. They were trying to control everything, and they weren't about to let me stop them. That night, I drove back to the boathouse, hoping to find more evidence to expose them once and for all. But as I approached, I saw headlights cutting through the darkness. I pulled off the road and parked behind a thicket of trees, watching in disbelief as two large SUVs rolled up to the boathouse. I recognized the men who stepped out immediately. David Klein, the HOA president, and a few others I hadn't seen before, faces I didn't recognize. But they had the air of men who were used to getting their way. They were carrying equipment, flashlights, tools, and something large wrapped in a tarp. My blood ran cold. They were up to something. I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone, ready to document everything, but just as I stepped out of the car, a sound froze me in my tracks. A loud click, followed by the unmistakable snap of a silenced gun. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. They weren't here to talk. They were here to stop me. I quickly ducked behind a cluster of bushes, my mind racing. I'd known the HOA was dangerous, but this was something else entirely. They were willing to go to extremes, murderous extremes, to keep their operation hidden. I had no choice now but to leave. But as I turned to run, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A second car was parked a few yards away. It was a plain black sedan with tinted windows. And standing next to it was a figure I hadn't expected to see, Sheriff Miller. He was the one who had always been there, looking out for the community. But there he was, shaking hands with David Klein, the two of them speaking in low, hushed tones. The sheriff was part of it. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just a fight against the HOA. This was bigger than that. The entire system was corrupted. Everyone I thought I could trust had either been bought off or intimidated into silence. There was no one left to turn to. No one except me. I had to act fast. I needed to expose the truth before they had the chance to silence me for good. But the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. If they caught me, I wouldn't just lose my fight for the lake. I'd lose everything. I made my way back to town in the dead of night, driving straight to the one place I hadn't thought to go, the local news station. The entire town relied on that small channel for updates. Maybe, just maybe, they would be willing to listen. Inside, the place was quiet, the newsroom only dimly lit. I found the one reporter I knew, Sarah Thomas. She'd always been the one to dig deeper, to ask the tough questions. If anyone could help me expose this, it was her. "Sarah," I whispered, urgency flooding my voice. "I need you to listen. The HOA, they're poisoning the lake. They're controlling the water supply. I have proof. I have everything." Her eyes flicked to me, then back to the screen. "Ajmal, you know I can't just run with a story like that without evidence. People will come after me, after you." I shoved the phone in front of her, showing the footage I'd captured, the contractors, the barrels, the log. "This is it. This is the proof. They've already taken control of the lake. If we don't expose them, they'll keep going. And no one will stop them." Her eyes widened as she watched, her expression shifting from skepticism to alarm. "You're right. This is bigger than anything I've ever covered. But if we run this, we're going up against the entire system, the sheriff, the HOA, the people who own this town. This could get dangerous, I know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But it's already dangerous. We have to do something. We have to stop them before it's too late." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, I'll help you, but we need to move quickly. If they find out you're onto them, they'll come after both of us." I didn't have time to argue. I could see it in her eyes. She understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about a poisoned lake anymore. This was about survival, truth, and taking down the corrupt system that had strangled our community. But I knew deep down that this wasn't going to be easy. They would stop at nothing to protect their secret. If we wanted to take them down, we'd have to play their game and outsmart them at every turn. By morning, everything had fallen apart. Sarah's story never made it to air. I woke up to the sound of pounding on my door, loud, furious, unrelenting. Before I could even react, 3 uniformed officers burst into my house. They didn't say much, just handed me a warrant and started tearing through my belongings. Within minutes, they found what they claimed was evidence of illegal activity. Documents I had never seen before, chemicals I had never owned. It was a setup. The HOA had moved faster than I expected. They dragged me outside in handcuffs while my neighbors watched from their porches, whispering among themselves. I could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the fear. Overnight, I had gone from being the guy trying to save the lake to the town's #1 villain. David Klein stood at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, that smug smirk plastered across his face. "Should have minded your own business, Ajmal," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "Now look what you've done. They threw me into a holding cell, no explanation, no hearing, nothing. Hours turned into what felt like days. The air was thick and stale, my mind replaying every decision I'd made. I'd tried to do the right thing. I'd tried to protect the lake, the community, the truth, but now it had all been twisted against me. When Sarah finally managed to see me, her eyes were red, her voice trembling. "They pulled the story," she said. "The station got a call from higher up, funding threats, legal pressure. They're in bed with the HOA, everyone is." I felt my stomach turn. There it was, the full realization of just how deep this went. The HOA controlled everything, the town, the water, even the truth itself. Sarah leaned in closer, whispering, "But I didn't delete the footage. I still have a copy. I'll find a way." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Small, fragile, but real. Still, as she walked away and the cell door slammed shut again, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I'd already lost. Maybe this was how they won, by making people like me look insane, by turning heroes into criminals. That night, lying on the cold, hard floor of the cell, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. The same thought kept echoing in my head. What if the lake dies, and no one ever knows why? It felt like the walls were closing in around me, but I couldn't back down now. I had come too far, risked too much. The lake, the people I cared about, the fight for truth, all of it had brought me here to this moment. The morning after I was released from jail, thanks to Sarah's help, I was on edge. I had no real freedom anymore. No one trusted me. The HOA had framed me as a criminal, and my reputation in the community was destroyed. It felt like the battle was already over and I had lost. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I met Sarah in the parking lot of a small diner. The cold morning air felt different, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. She handed me her phone, the screen glowing with a grainy, shaky video. The footage was from the night I'd snuck into the boathouse. The contractors, the barrels, the cyanide. It was the proof I needed. But we had to get it out to the world. "No more delays. We're going public with it," Sarah said, her voice firm but tinged with worry. "We have one shot. I've lined up a meeting with the state's environmental agency. They're the only ones who can investigate this properly." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. We could expose them, stop them from getting away with it all. But just as I started to feel the rush of adrenaline, the unmistakable sound of screeching tires cut through the air. A black SUV pulled into the lot. Before I could react, the door swung open, and there was David Klein, flanked by two large men in dark suits. They moved with purpose, no hesitation. They knew exactly what they were doing. "You're making a huge mistake, Ajmal," David said, his tone cold. He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You've gone too far. You think they'll listen to you? You're nothing more than a nuisance." I stood my ground, refusing to let his words shake me. "I'm not the problem here, you are." "You and the HOA," David smirked, glancing at the men beside him. "This doesn't end well for you." "The footage? It won't make it past your front door." His eyes flicked to Sarah, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You really think you can expose us? We own this town. You're playing a game you can't win." It was like everything I had been fighting for was closing in on me, right here, right now. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I took a step back, feeling the weight of the phone in my pocket, the evidence that could end this nightmare. I looked at Sarah. "Go, get to the agency." "I'll deal with this," she hesitated, eyes flickering between me and the men. "Ajmal, please." "I'll be fine," I said, cutting her off. "Just get the damn footage out there." Reluctantly, she nodded and bolted towards her car. I knew the clock was ticking. Every second counted. But I wasn't about to let these men intimidate me any longer. David's eyes followed Sarah's retreating figure. Then he turned back to me. "You think this is some kind of stand, don't you? You're playing a dangerous game." His hand went to his pocket, and I knew what that meant. He wasn't bluffing. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The fear, the threat of violence, the power they held over the town, it was all a manipulation. I couldn't back down. "Not now." I took a deep breath, my voice steady. "This ends today, David. You've been poisoning the lake, controlling the water supply, lying to the community. And it's over. I'm not afraid of you anymore." David laughed, but it was hollow, a nervous chuckle. "You really think the authorities are going to listen to you? It's too late. You've already lost." I pulled out my phone, holding it up to him. No, I haven't. This footage is going to every news outlet, every agency, everyone who can make sure your little operation is exposed for what it is." His face twisted into a snarl, and before he could move, I tapped send. The video was out there, gone, to people who could do something about it. It wasn't just proof of the poisoning. It was proof of their corruption, their lies. The SUV door slammed open again, and the men made a move toward me. I knew I couldn't let them take the phone, couldn't let them stop me now. But in that instant, a sharp siren cut through the air, followed by the sound of screeching tires. The state police were here. Sarah had done it. She'd made it to them, and they were on their way to the rescue. David froze, his smug expression faltering. "No," he muttered under his breath. "This can't be happening." Before he could react, the state officers swarmed in, their badges visible. The two suited men tried to make a move, but they were quickly restrained. David was grabbed by one of the officers, his face twisted in shock and disbelief. "This is over," the officer said, his voice calm but unyielding. "The lake, the community, everything I had fought for, it wasn't over yet. The battle had been long, and I had lost more than I could ever have imagined. But this was my victory. The truth had been exposed. The aftermath came swiftly. Within days, the footage of the poisoning, along with the damning evidence I had gathered, was plastered all over the news. The HOA board members, including David Klein, were arrested on charges of environmental terrorism, corruption, and endangering the lives of every single person in the community. The state's environmental agency was on the case, launching a full investigation into the water contamination, and the local authorities were scrambling to keep up with the public outcry. The lake, our lake, was finally getting the attention it deserved. But even as the community began to rally around me, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. The lake was damaged, the fish were gone, and years of neglect couldn't be fixed overnight. The poison they dumped into those waters had left a scar that would take time to heal. But at least there was hope. Sarah and I sat by the lake a week later, watching the water as it slowly began to clear. It was early in the morning, the same time I used to fish, and the air was still cool, the mist rising off the surface. We were quiet for a long time, letting the silence settle around us. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. "You did it, Ajmal. You saved the lake. You saved this town." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the water. "We saved it, but it's going to take a while to fix everything they broke. The damage. It's not just physical. It's the trust that was shattered, the people who let it happen, the fear of speaking up." She was quiet for a moment before replying. "I think people will start to speak up now. You've shown them it's possible. It's not just about the lake. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it feels like you're fighting alone." I glanced over at her, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of peace. The fight wasn't over, but I had taken the first step, and that was enough for me. The HOA's reign of control had come to an end. The neighborhood slowly began to rebuild, not just the land, but the trust between the people. No one would forget what happened, but we could all move forward, together. As I stood up to leave, I turned back to the water one last time. The ripples on the surface were still there, but now they felt like a reminder that even when things seem impossible, the truth has a way of rising to the surface. I looked at Sarah one final time. "You know, this lake isn't just mine anymore. It's everyone's." She smiled, and for the first time I believed her. If you've ever witnessed injustice or felt the weight of corruption in your own community, remember, it only takes one voice to make a difference. Speak up, stand tall. Share this story to remind others that when we fight together, we can hold those in power accountable. Don't let fear silence you. The truth always finds a way.